son. There'll be peace when you are done. Lay your weary head to rest. Don't you cry no more.
Hey guys, you're watching Mia's New Pair of Glasses, and today is my 1-year anniversary from the first video I ever posted on YouTube. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who supported me and followed me throughout this year, and seeing how my content has developed over time as I started basically not knowing what I was doing and learned a lot on this journey. So thank you guys so much, and we're going to get into the topic of the video now. But one more thing I want to say is this, that there are plenty of channels out there that play it safe and never present any information that might disturb people and disturb their current beliefs. But that's not me and my channel. My goal is to present the truth to you and to make you guys think to the best of my ability. And sometimes that is going to challenge your beliefs and hit emotional buttons within you based on what you've thought, your whole life. If you're watching a channel just for confirmation of your own beliefs, you're never going to get to the truth. Okay, so now on to the topic of the video. So over time, the establishment has gone back and forth on a lot of things that are good for us, then later they're bad for us. Then they're good for us, and they're bad for us. But one thing that we have never heard attacked has been coffee. So we're going to talk about caffeine in all of its states and how the rise of coffee plays into what's going on in our world today. So when I talk about caffeine, I'm talking about coffee, tea, energy drinks, and soda. So in a world where there's so much muddying of the waters, when there's so much information out there to make us confused about what to believe, what do? We look for what's being pushed. And for whatever is being pushed, we know to be suspicious and probably go in the other direction. So when I was sitting around with Brian talking, we have a lot of interesting discussions when we try and sort through what is true and what is not. We were talking about how tired we've been over the last 5 to 10 years and how quickly time has seemed to be going by. And I thought, you know what? Around the time where I started feeling tired is when coffee started to explode and show up on every corner. So it made me curious, and I decided to delve into this topic. So something important to note is that coffee consumption actually declined in the mid-1990s and fell below 50% of people consuming it. And then boom, all of a sudden, Starbucks blows up and there's coffee everywhere. So in a recent survey, 79% of people surveyed said they had had a cup of coffee the previous morning. And these rates continue to rise. The number of Americans drinking a daily cup of coffee is at the highest level since 2012, with its continual rise. 64% of Americans age 18 or over said they had a cup of coffee the previous day in 2018. That compares with 62% in 2017. So numbers of coffee consumption continue to rise. So now let's talk about the rise of coffee bars. Coffee stands everywhere came out of nowhere. Do you remember ever having coffee stands on every corner? People talk about the days flying by and time passing quicker. We know we are losing time each day. If you are watching time and comparing PC time to an analog clock, then you will know that this is true. So my question is does this shortening of the days increase our tiredness and our need for caffeine? And another extremely important note that I found when I was researching this topic is that coffee can indeed disrupt the body's internal clock and stir up unwanted emotions. So did you hear that part? It messes up our internal clock. So that could be a huge motive for them pushing caffeine. Now, Starbucks started to pick up steam in the 1980s, and by 1996 it opened its first international location in Tokyo. Now, by the late 80s, Starbucks had 46 stores existing across the Northwest and Midwest. And by 1992, when it had its initial public offering, Starbucks had 140 outlets with a revenue of $73.5 million. And that became its worldwide takeover. Now, another thing that I was thinking about when I was researching this was the tiredness, the increase of tiredness. And then I went to chronic fatigue syndrome. And the reason I'm pointing out these dates in Starbucks is because it correlates with the increased rate of reports of tiredness in the population. Now, in the 1960s and 70s, chronic fatigue syndrome, which was not named that yet, was attributed to being a psychiatric disorder. But of course, we know we can't trust the clinical establishment either. So in the 1980s, it started to gain more attention. And by 2006, the Centers for Disease Control recognized chronic fatigue syndrome as a serious illness and launched a campaign to raise public awareness about it. And coincidentally, as the rise in tiredness and chronic fatigue syndrome occurs, we also have a rise in coffee consumption that is continuing to go up. So regardless of the cause of increased tiredness, we know that they profit off of it on both ends, not only with the addictive factor of caffeine, but with the rise in coffee bars. So as I was researching this topic, another question I had was, how would they benefit from pushing caffeine, and what does it do to the brain? We know that what it does do is it enables you to cram 6 hours of work into 45 minutes, and that benefits the system. So what caffeine does do is one heck of an impersonation. In your brain, caffeine is the quintessential mimic of a neurochemical called adenosine. Adenosine is produced by neurons throughout the day as they fire, and as more of it is produced, the more your nervous system ratchets down. Your nervous system monitors adenosine levels through receptors, particularly the A1 receptor that is found in your brain and throughout your body. As the chemical passes through the receptors, your adenosine tab increases until your nervous system pays it off by putting you to sleep. This is important not only because by blocking the receptors, caffeine disrupts the nervous system's monitoring of the adenosine tab, but also because of the players who make an appearance as this is happening. The neurotransmitters dopamine and glutamate, the brain's own homegrown stimulants, are freer to do their stimulating work with the adenosine tab on hold, and that's the effect you feel not long after downing your triple-shot skinny mochaccino. In other words, it's not the caffeine that's doing the stimulating. Instead, it's keeping the doors blocked while the real party animals of the brain do what they love to do. The reason it seems that coffee and tea become a morning ritual is that caffeine helps fight off the sleepy feelings we're left with after a night of paying off a full adenosine tab. That's something that our favorite legal drug is quite proficient at doing. So what it's doing is it's promoting dopamine levels, and if you don't know anything about dopamine, it promotes feelings of well-being. It's the thing you get when you do a drug or eat something you like or are intimate with another person. So the natural question that popped up for me was, is this why they push caffeine? They keep people at false levels of dopamine so they are more content with life while you continue to work in the system. Who will feel discontented enough to realize that this world is a shit show and fight back if they have constant shots of dopamine hitting their brains? Is it an essential tool of the establishment to give people the motivation to go to work and power through in the system? And the military is all about compliance, obedience, and following orders. In every military MRE, they have coffee. They push coffee. So is this a connection that we can make by knowing what we know about coffee? So some other interesting things to note about caffeine that benefits the system. Caffeine could reduce fertility in women by about 27%. And we know how they feel about population control. Caffeine consumption can lead to increased anxiety, depression, and the need for anxiety medication, benefiting the big pharma. Caffeine increases the amount of sugary beverages consumed by people, which contributes to obesity and diabetes. And we know how the industry of sugar and sugar addiction benefits the system. Also, we know that in my last video we talked about tobacco and the possibility that tobacco actually prevents the ability to be mind controlled. So does caffeine counter the effects of nicotine? You often find them together. Does caffeine keep you asleep? And another important thing to know is that cigarette smokers metabolize caffeine twice as fast as non-smokers. Caffeine also metabolizes at different rates among individuals for various reasons, but with the cigarette smokers, they metabolize it twice as fast. Is the targeting of youth with caffeine for the reason that it produces less awakened young adults? Now, with the rise in gourmet coffee bars, we see 48% of millennials saying they had a cup of coffee they consider to be gourmet the day before. Now, why is this important? Because caffeine interferes with sleep, and sleep plays a critical role in learning. Some laboratory research suggests that caffeine interferes with sleep and learning among adolescent rodents, which in turn hinders normal neurological development that is noticeable into adulthood. And it's not just drinks. With the targeting of youth, the increase of soda and energy drinks available to youth, it's also in such things as jelly beans, waffles, syrup, and chewing gum. They now have caffeine added to them to enhance their stimulating effect. So it's also in food. So guys, I'm not trying to attack caffeine or coffee. I'm actually a coffee drinker. But what I want to do is get to the truth. And how we do that is we look for motive, and we look for who would benefit. So now, knowing what we know about the facts about what caffeine does and how caffeine has been continually pushed and is now actually being encouraged by the establishment, then we know that that is something that we need to be wary of and we need to look into. So my thoughts are that caffeine actually inhibits something in the brain that allows people to wake up. Because I had a year back in 2013 where I didn't drink coffee, and that year was absolutely pivotal to my awakening. And with smokers, what better way to counter the effects of tobacco actually protecting us from mind control than getting a coffee in our hand? So I'm talking about coffee because that is a main agenda of the government and the establishment with the rise of Starbucks, Coffee Bean, Peet's Coffee, all the gamut of coffee houses. But the root of it is really caffeine, all types of caffeine, and how it is invading our food and beverages. And though it did say that caffeine consumption can lead to alcohol and drug abuse, the system doesn't want people to not be functionable, but they want them hyperproductive. So in treatment centers everywhere, they have unlimited supplies of coffee for their clients. So it's problem, reaction, solution, a method that's been used successfully over time by the controllers. They cause the drug abuse, then they get people sober, and then they can mold them into productive human beings. In all AA and NA programs, there's an unlimited supply of caffeine. And how about the energy drinks in the late 90s, early 2000s, coming out of nowhere with a vengeance? And now they're everywhere. And you can see the commercials for the 5-hour energy drinks and Red Bull, everything the establishment is pushing. And we know when they're pushing something, it's something we should stay away from. So with the clues that we found out by doing this research, I want you to think for yourself and wonder, what is the real agenda behind caffeine? So that's it for this topic today. Don't forget, if you donate $40 or more to my channel, I will send you your own Mia's New Pair of Glasses t-shirt. Now, if I have not contacted you about your t-shirt yet and I somehow missed you, please send me an email at finallypresent@yahoo.com and let me know so I can get your information. That's it, guys. That's all I have for you today. Everybody stay safe, be good to one another, and as always, God bless.